The annual Toronto Caribbean Carnival is not until August, but preparations are well underway. In fact, one mass band just launched its theme for the year, and it's getting them into some trouble, facing accusations of cultural misappropriation. You are offended?
Yeah, well, I was kind of offended, yeah.
These are some pictures posted on Instagram of costumes that will be part of Carnival Nation's band for the big parade in August. They show women wearing traditional Indigenous headdress, which some people say is inappropriate.
I have covered the topic of Black Indians very often as a Native American journalist and radio show host, and I have found so often a disproportionate amount of understanding for those of white and Indian ancestry and Black and Indian ancestry. For example, if I say, I'm Mohawk and Austrian and German, people very rarely question that I'm Native American. This is not necessarily the case with people of African American descendancy and Native American descendancy. They often get questioned, well, you couldn't be, etc., etc. So it's kind of a double standard. At a recent powwow, I was lucky to meet up with some friends of mine, Dr. Erica Coleman, who is Rappahannock and African American, and she is the writer of the book That the Blood Stay Pure. She's also a professor of Black Studies at the University of Delaware. Mr. Harold Caldwell is Grovon and Muskogee, and he's a northern traditional dancer who's been all over the country. And both of them have told me on numerous accounts on how they receive criticism for, because they look African American, they couldn't possibly be Native American. So I interviewed them, and they have some very, very interesting comments.
As you can see, I am of African American heritage, and I do have what they call dreadlocks. And a lot of times when I tell people that I am also Native American, they have a real problem. Oh my God, an Indian in dreadlocks. Well, of course, if you understand the history of African American and Native American peoples in this country, we had some things in common. Once the communication barrier was taken care of, then Native people and African peoples realized that there was so much in common culturally. For instance, the drum. The drum is the heartbeat of the nation, of Native Americans and both African peoples. We honor our ancestors. It's shared both between African American and Native American people. This love of nature, no, not a worship of nature, but understanding that we are all connected.
I spent most of my life dancing out in California, out west. Never really had any problems until I came here to Virginia. It is absolutely a struggle. People with the cultural, conflict within themselves. I think you really have to be strong within yourself first in order to walk in this world, especially if you don't quote unquote look Indian. I think that's the first part that has to come first, and then moving forward to try to prove who you are. But there are full-bloods that feel like they don't need to have their card. Only cultural group in the country that needs to identify who they are as a culture, and people generally accept you for who you are and they trust in who you are. And I think when you do things the right way, then people know that you're walking in the right way, and they generally believe in what you say.
When we found out that those things were in common, it was very easy for us to begin to fellowship with one another. And as one artist says, he says, first we prayed, then we danced, and then we made relatives.
It's very disrespectful when you see people just wearing them as a costume, right? Because it's not a costume. It's very, very traditional, very, very cultural, and it holds a lot of meaning. It's very symbolic, exactly.
I am immigrant from Egypt. I thank you, the Native American Indians for allowing us to come to their land. You are the real owners. We thank you, everybody, all immigrants. We owe you everything nice. You saved my life. You saved my family, my grandchildren. And Muslims, we are not savages. We are not killers. We want to live in peace, and we are living in hell back home. So I thank you, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Native Americans.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Love you too. Thank you. All right. Take care. All right.
Well, I'm a blue-eyed Indian, and a lot of blacks don't know that they are Indians.
How many comments were there that you saw? Shanice is part Jamaican and part Micmac and plays Mass in the Caribbean Carnival every year. She says the headdress is reserved for chiefs as a symbol of bravery when they go to war. She understands that the theme for the Carnival Nations Band this year is to celebrate Canada's 150th birthday, but she says this is not the way to do it.
I'm sure that there were ways that we could have integrated Aboriginal culture into celebrating Canada.
Well, I got ordained about 20 years ago now, and for me it was a way to become more relevant, not only socially active and helping people, but trying to have a spiritual life too. I thought it would... What denomination? It was the United Church. That's the largest Protestant church in Canada. The government did set it up in 1925. They also gave it the power of a bank when they formed it, the power to lend money, issue promissory notes. So clearly it was set up as a corporation, but also a way to assimilate, that's a polite word for genocide. And, the Vatican was the model. All the Protestant churches followed suit, including the way they treated Aboriginal people and the way they murdered them. About 25 years ago, I was working in Vancouver with Native people on the street, and saw all the symptoms, all the problems of something really horrendous, and nobody wanted to talk about. The death rate still is as high as it ever was in the time of the residential schools among Native people. Everything from the way that Native people are killed regularly by police, forced off their land. Most homeless people in Canada are Native, even though they're only 2% of the population. Half the prison population is Aboriginal. One of the reasons that is the government makes money actually by having Native people in jail, because any money that the government would have given to them reverts to the government if a Native person's in prison. So there's an economic incentive for the government to lock up Indians.
And a lot of blacks don't know that they are Indians. That they are Indians. That they are Indians.
The very first Indian I ever spoke to told me that his best friend had been murdered in the United Church residential school when he was a boy, buried in the hills out back. And he claimed that all the church people knew about it, which is why they never invited Native people to come into the church. Because I asked the question, why aren't there any Indians in coming to church when they're about a third of the population? Nobody wanted to say anything about that. So literally every time I visited a Native person, they had a story of someone being killed, children being raped, all that stuff. And I tried to get the church at the time to take an interest, and they pretty much warned me to back off from listening to those stories. The missionaries had been operating for a long time in Canada, and these crimes had been going on, but it received a real impetus when the government authorized these church schools back in the 1890s, and they went on for about a century. The last one didn't close until 1996. Probably half the children died in these places. Over 50,000 children never came back. Native people only own about 1% of the original land that was theirs. And they're on reservations, which are actually owned by the government. The Crown, British Crown, owns all land in Canada under their law. And even on Indian reservations, the Native people just administer the land for the Crown. So they don't even own their own land. And then the Crown would then lease out the land to the churches, who would then sell it off to various, multinationals and that for a lot of money. So it was a big, money-making operation from the beginning. Well, there was, an attempted revolution in Canada in 1837. It was crushed. Basically, in Quebec and Ontario, there were attempts by both French and English-speaking people to throw out the British Crown and establish a republican form of government. And by defeating that, what they did is the Crown established a colonial system of rule, which is still in place now with the Governor-General system and that. It also solidified the power of the Church. So the Roman Catholic Church became the main power in Quebec, and in order to maintain loyalty to the British Crown. So basically it established a feudal system where the churches had absolute control, and that allowed them to run these residential schools and get away with murder for a long time. So it was very linked to the kind of oligarchy that was in place and how that helped this church-administered genocide to occur. In a nutshell, what happened was I was letting people speak from the pulpit about the crimes they'd seen in the residential school, the murders and that. I also found out about the land deals that were happening where the church was selling off native land to big logging companies for kickbacks. And I wrote a letter about that to the church. I was fired without cause and eventually thrown out of the church without any due process at all. But that one thing led to another, and I began to work a lot more with the survivors after that, the eyewitnesses to these crimes. And that's how the world began to learn about all of this stuff. We also found out a history of the land deals that had been going on, where the church had been taking the land they had basically stolen from Native people and selling off to logging companies and others for money kickbacks to the church. Within, about 4 weeks of me writing a letter of concern about that, I was summarily fired from my pulpit without cause and eventually defrocked without any kind of due process. They came in and handed me a letter of dismissal. And I tried appealing it through the courts. The courts wouldn't touch it. Basically, I learned that the church has a power unto itself and is not accountable to the civil courts at all. They have their own internal courts to try dissidents. That's a long history of that, So it's kind of ironic. The same system that allowed them to get away with murdering Native children also allowed them to destroy my life and also silence any criticism within the church at all. They approached my wife at the time and offered to help her with her divorce, because they said I'd never work again in Canada, which turned out to be true. I'm still under a very severe blacklisting. But in return for helping her with the divorce, she provided them with information in that. So she eventually got custody of my 2 daughters. Well, I think we have to attack directly these oligarchical institutions. For example, people have to disaffiliate from these corporate institutions called the churches. Stop giving money to these institutions. Remove the tax-exempt status under the law for these churches. Make clergy public servants. License them so that if they do commit wrongs, their licenses can be removed. In other words, establish public control over these really medieval institutions that are powers unto themselves. It's got to happen from the grassroots, because the governments, the police, we are totally complicit in this whole history of genocide. We see that in Ireland, Canada, here, the United States. So there's no point going to the wolf and telling it to stop eating sheep. There was a thing called the Nuremberg Legal Conventions in 1950 that the United Nations passed, and it said, even though I don't really trust the United Nations, nevertheless, it was a principle in international law that says if your government or any organization you're part of is engaged in criminal acts, including war against innocent people, you have an obligation not to pay them taxes. Called the Nuremberg Legal Conventions in 1950 that the United Nations passed, and it said, even though I don't really trust the United Nations, nevertheless, it was a principle in international law that says if your government or any organization you're part of is engaged in criminal acts, including war against innocent people, you have an obligation not to pay them taxes. Called the Nuremberg Legal Conventions in 1950 that the United Nations passed, and it said, even though I don't really trust the United Nations, nevertheless, it was a principle in international law that says if your government or any organization you're part of is engaged in criminal acts, including war against innocent people, you have an obligation not to pay them taxes. We're standing on solid moral and legal ground when we do that. And I say take the money away from the government and the churches and put it back into the community, and reinvent our society is what you have to do. Canada actually has the highest rate of foreign ownership of any country in the world. Primarily American, but a lot of Chinese investment now. But like here, the Crown claims to own everything. So there's been a movement that developed in Canada 2 years ago to try to establish the Republic of Ganata, which was a Mohawk word meaning, Canada comes from a Mohawk word meaning our home or our village. And basically, it's a movement to disaffiliate ties with the British Crown, to reestablish, public control over the land. And it's got to be at every level. It's a spiritual movement, it's a community-based movement, it's a political movement. You need to operate on all those levels, and you've got to lead by example. This is a very exciting time because in Italy, Germany, Ireland, here, and in America, as well as Canada, we now have a movement developing to confront the Vatican and set up an international tribunal to actually put them on trial. When I come back in September, we're going to be holding more rallies. We're going to be here when the Pope comes and try to perform a citizen's arrest on him. We're going to be holding other events to unite the people who've suffered from the church. This isn't just about Native people or Catholic orphanages in Ireland. This is about children violated systematically over the centuries by these institutions, and they're criminal organizations, and they've got to be confronted and disestablished, as I said. So this is part of an international campaign, and the support I've been getting here is unbelievable, actually, much better than in North America. The media, when we were in Ireland picketing the Parliament the other day, we were on national radio, television, and the newspapers. That's something you'd never see in Canada or the US. We'd never get that kind of coverage. No, this won't go away because the Pope is personally implicated. As far back as 1962, every priest and bishop anywhere in the world in the Catholic Church knew that they were under papal order to suppress evidence of children being abused. So they're all engaged in a criminal conspiracy. It's www.hiddenfromhistory.org, and on there you can see a lot of the evidence that we've accumulated over the years, including our film Unrepentant, which is one of few documentary film awards in America. Anyone can access it on that website, hiddenfromhistory.org. And we encourage people to make copies of it, to take the evidence and use it as a way to get the stories out in your own community, because this is happening all over the world. And the most important thing to do first is to get the survivors to come out and speak and to confront those like Holly Greig and others who are confronting state-level child trafficking rings here in England. And it's part of the same crime. So hopefully the website will help people to do that, and we encourage people to do their own work.
No one was at Carnival Nation's mass camp today, and when I reached one of the leaders on the phone, he didn't want to comment. But the leader of another camp, Atlantic Mass, who is also on the advisory committee for the festival, says no offense was intended.
It's all in celebrating the culture of Canada and the history of Canada, and I think that it should be looked upon as something good and something that everyone should celebrate.
Carnival in Trinidad, the greatest show on earth. In their quest for authenticity, Carnival band leaders become avid students of research as they delve into ancient civilizations and weird tribal customs. Embroiderers and artisans prepare months ahead for the grand celebrations. Buffalo Bill Cody never saw a bullhead that was more bull-like, nor a papoose more comfortable. Magnificent robes, the trappings of splendor, are expertly put together. A modern-day Tutankhamun is most concerned with his casket. Others recreate the crafts that plied upon the Nile. Their magnificent thrones studded with precious jewels and the awe-inspiring Sphinx, all relics of a once glorious past. Handled with care, offensive weapons of another age. From cast-off oil drums, which are tempered and tuned to a nicety, comes a musical revelation. A robe for the goddess of the cult of the cobra. For the thousands of spectators, bleachers are erected along the route to the center of competition. At the Queen's Park Savannah, over the huge competition stage, floodlighting is set up for the pre-carnival night shows. And at last, the official sanction for Carnival. And at last, the official sanction for Carnival. And at last, the official sanction for Carnival. Is it any wonder that Carnival is so much part and parcel of the Trinidad way of life? So much part and parcel of the Trinidad way of life. So much part and parcel of the Trinidad way of life. It is much more than just 2 days of fete and abandon. Its roots are deeply embedded in the hearts of every man, woman, and child of this fun-loving island. The kids are nursed on the milk of the calypso beat. They are weaned on the tantalizing rhythm of the steel band. They are nurtured on the rhythm and cut their wisdom teeth on even more primitive rhythm. So, in the carnival picture, so, in the carnival picture, so, in the carnival picture, they take first place. Competitions are organized for the future kings and queens of Carnival. Proud and indulgent parents go to great lengths and expense to reproduce miniature, legendary figures. Carnival in Trinidad is actually a cultural federation of the islands, and this French dance troupe from Guadeloupe makes its contribution. Dancing the limbo, a feat of absolute balance. This lissom lass has just passed under the bar at 10 inches from the ground. Let's see if this chap can do it. Oh, hard luck. The dance, like music, has always been an important medium of expression for the people of Trinidad. This group of native dancers skillfully interprets one of the many folk dances in their extensive repertoire. This group of native dancers skillfully interprets one of the many folk dances in their extensive repertoire. This group of native dancers skillfully interprets one of the many folk dances in their extensive repertoire. Sioux, Apaches, Dakotas, Blackfeet, or what have you. There'll be no scalping during this 2-day truce. The epic struggle of the red man against the encroachment of the so-called white civilization will always ring through the pages of history. But this is Carnival, the season of festivity, and these erstwhile warriors are determined to get their full share in Operation Enjoyment. Amazons, mythical tribe of women warriors. How would you like to be captured by one of these vivacious creatures? What a complete transformation is effected by the magic of Carnival.
Do you see that some people might see it as a sign of disrespect?
I can see that some people can kind of misconstrue what we're trying to portray.
Yes.
But I think if they would ask, Carnival Nations or anyone else the questions about how did you come about this theme and And why? I think they would get the answers they're looking for.
This is a big year for the Caribbean Carnival. Not only is it Canada's 150th, it's the festival's 50th anniversary, widely described as the biggest cultural festival in North America. For Shanice, she doesn't expect Carnival nations to change their costumes, but she says there were dozens of negative comments about them on Instagram, and she feels they weren't interested in having the conversation.
They just kind of shut down their comment section when people started saying, I think this is disrespectful.
Now, some of our viewers have mentioned that Mass is actually characterized by elaborate headdress and was originally inspired by native groups from South, Central, and North American native people. And you can't misappropriate your own culture, they say, so this should not be considered offensive.
The most self-effacing office worker suddenly finds himself in the glamorous role of a stalwart general. Even his best friends sometimes fail to recognize him. Not to be outdone are the renowned rulers of Persia, Cyrus, Darius, and others. All are caught in the spirit of revelry. Here's a band that bounces out of the east, Ali Baba and his merry band of cutthroats. But wait, seems like there are really barbers in the outfit. Well, such is Carnival. All bands are heading for the Queen's Park Savannah, the chief place of competition. Shades of Africa, deep, dark, and mysterious. The home of the pygmy, the Bantu, the Watusi. Primitive, savage, and cannibal. Belshazzar, outstanding personality of biblical times, in dignified fashion, makes his grand entrance on the competition stage. Its history, the glory and splendor of the past. Kings and princes, generals and guards, prophets and patriarchs, beautiful maidens and exotic dancers. All threads in the intricate fabric of Carnival. The vanquished, the Crees of Canada, most famous of the Indian tribes from the top half of the North American continent, have forsaken the prancing of the red-skin rumba for the sinuous rhythm of the calypso. enchanting daughters of the wide open spaces. Egypt, the desert land watered by the river Nile. Land of the Pharaoh, Thotens, Tutankhamun, and Amen-Ra. Land of the Israelites, land of mystery, land of spectacle, land of sorcery and witchcraft, land of mummy, the cuneiform, the sarcophagus, land of the Sphinx and the pyramid, the immortal relics of Egypt. And in the Old Testament story of Noah and the ark, the great deluge lasted for 40 days and for 40 nights. And for 40 days and 40 nights, Christians will observe Lent, a period of abstinence and self-mortification. And from thence is laid the groundwork for another celebration of Carnival in Trinidad, the greatest show on earth.